Hello, Taylor Elwood here with the Mature Masculinity Podcast. And today I have a guest with me, Andrew from Infinite Devotion. I'm really excited because this is my first guest on this podcast. Andrew, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your work around men's work?
Sure. Well, I'm honored to be the first guest on your podcast. That's pretty cool. So I'm glad to be here and I appreciate you having me. A lot of what I do is in the realm of teaching men and women both about what it means to be truly embodied and conscious in your relationship with each other. And in my life and in my world, that plays out in what we call power exchange dynamics and dominance and submission. And, you know, a lot of who I am comes out of the healing and evolution that I've gone through because of these power exchange dynamics and how they have called me to be a better version of myself. And the easiest and hardest way to answer who are you is really I'm me. But I was never actually me until I've been challenged and broken down and rebuilt myself in a more authentic way because of what these kinds of relationship dynamics have done for me. And through that process and the way that both I've found myself and my wife and submissive Dawn has found herself through this, we built Infinite Devotion, which is the business that we have now, where we share our journey and our own learnings with other people who are trying to sort out how do we do this relationship thing? How do we get masculine and feminine right? How do we get this polarity thing to actually work? How do we do power exchange dynamics in relationship in a way that doesn't work just in the bedroom, but also works on a Tuesday morning over breakfast?
Yeah. Full disclosure for people who are watching this, I'm actually a student of one of your courses, which is How to Become a Dominant Man. And it's interesting because in my men's work, I've read a number of different books, and some books take the word dominant and they treat it like a dirty word. Like, oh, there's this patriarchal association. So I'm curious, what is your definition of dominant, and what does that mean?
That is a great question. And to me, the word dominant first and foremost means self-control. When when people project negative views onto dominance, they are thinking about it through a lens that is well earned by lots of the history of how men have treated women, that negative view of a power over women kind of approach to it. And the reason I use that word and that I love that word is that it does challenge that very premise of dominance, because I teach men to approach dominance as inner control, inner dominance, self control, and really getting your own shit together, getting your own life together so that you can inspire someone to want to follow you rather than having to force someone to follow you, which is kind of the old model of dominance, that there's almost this forceful nature to the word. And in my world, dominant means that I don't need to force anyone to do anything. I try to, for myself first and foremost, and then through what I teach, to teach men to become so solid that people want to follow you, that they're inspired to follow you, that they see you as something worthy of following because you see yourself that way. So it really does all start with that inner work to become solid, conscious, aware, connected to the truth so that we can lead.
One of the things that I really appreciated about your course, I actually found it through FetLife. I clicked on it was on an ad. In case you're curious as to how I found my way to your course.
You might be
Um,
the only person who actually clicked on those ads. I stopped doing them.
well, I got lucky you then, I guess. Lucky me. I clicked on it and I was like, oh, okay. And the first video, kind of the introductory video, you say this up front before anyone even buys the course. You're like, look, if you're taking this course because you're trying to make your woman happy or you're trying to do this for your woman, that's the wrong reason. You have to take it for yourself. And I remember because at the time I was in a relationship that was pretty dysfunctional. And part of it was, and I full legitimacy here on my part, I was trying to figure out like, how can I fix this relationship? What can I do? That it ended up not working out, but I took the course anyway, and I did take it ultimately for myself. I really sat with that for like about a good hour before I signed up, and I'm like, you know what? Why am I taking this? I'm like, I'm going to take this for me. And it was interesting because the initial response that I got from her was like, well, like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, I realize I need to do this for myself. Like, I am trying to change who I am as a man. I want to show up better in my life. And whether I end up becoming a quote unquote dominant or not, I know that just taking this course alone is going to change my life. And I would say that fundamentally it has, as I've gone through the steps, and I've taken this, I started this course in January of this year. As I've gone through the steps, I've noticed that the quality of my life has improved significantly in terms of my self-care, how I communicate. And of course, some of that is also other things. Like I've taken some other courses like Trevor Boehm's Kill the Nice Guy. I've been involved in some different men's groups like Mankind Project. And just most recently, I came back from a Sacred Sons event, which you probably would have found really fascinating. I'll tell you about that later. But it really kind of stands out to me like we have to learn as men how to control ourselves because so often what we've been given by society in a way is kind of blanket permission to not be in control of ourselves, and that's what leads to this really just sloppy relationship dynamics regardless of what kind of relationship you have, that so many men show up in, and then women are kind of like, well, why do I even want to be with a man?
Yeah. And there's a lot of women who are giving up on men and men who are giving up on women too. And at the same time, we both still have this natural calling to be in relationship with each other, but it has become so dysfunctional in my eyes because we're all so wounded. We're all so hurt, and we're looking to our partners or to the external world to solve our problems, to fill the void we have in ourself, to fill the holes that we have in ourself, which are really just products of our own wounding. They're products of our upbringings, and like everything, of course, always goes back to our childhoods. So in order to find a healthier balance of power, because I hate to break it to anyone, there's power dynamics in every single relationship. The type that I'm involved in and that we're talking about here are power dynamics where we put everything on the table, where we communicate clearly with people or with our partners about what is okay, what isn't okay, what do we want, what do I need, what do you need, and we get very conscious and overt with what we're talking about. Most relationships function on covert communication, where everybody is kind of poking around in the dark, trying not to upset each other and trying to avoid pain. And the only way to really get beyond that is to confront our pain, to sit with our pain, to to move through our pain. Otherwise, we spend our whole life shrinking from it and becoming smaller in the process.
Yeah, covert contracts. No more Mr. Nice Guy. The author talks about that, and Trevor Boehm has his own interesting take on that, where he says that uh, when we're doing covert contracts, it's really because men are trying to make themselves feel safe, and but they're doing it the wrong way. They're doing it from a place where they're not communicating clearly. What are my wants, my needs, my longings? And so you're right. You know, you in a DS, certainly in a DS situation, you have to be fully transparent. So you have to put it on all the on the table and be like, okay, well, here's what's really going on. But I think it is accurate that within any kind of relationship, there's always some kind of power exchange going on. At different times, one partner or the other is going to, take the lead. And so how can we trust ourselves to do that or to follow somebody if in fact that communication isn't clear and transparent and there's stuff going on where the person's going behind the other person's back, and as a result, oops, here we are, and now we've got we have broken trust, and it's created this essential issue where neither person can really work through it, and then they give up on each other.
Well, and if we think about why would we not communicate clearly? It seems obvious that that would be important, that we would communicate our needs, our wants, our desires clearly with our partner. But then also, when we start getting afraid of upsetting that person, when our past programming kicks in and tells us that it isn't okay, or that we're going to be rejected or abandoned or mocked or teased or whatever it is that we're afraid of happening if we do speak up, we pull back. I respect Trevor's approach to that, like trying to feel safe. The real safety is in vulnerability. The real safety is in being completely vulnerable with what it is that you want and what it is that you need, because then you give yourself a chance to be met in that. But this really gets at what I call the ultimate sensitivity of men. Men are born sensitive with sensitive hearts. Like, we are emotionally sensitive creatures. And whenever someone questions me on that and says that they don't think men are very sensitive, I said, well, if you're a man or if you know one, ask him if can if he can tell when his woman is upset with him without even looking at her. Just walking into the house, when she's in the house, if if she's upset with him, or the tone, if he can read it or feel it in her text messages. Almost every man will be like, yeah, I know exactly when she's pissed off at me or when she's upset with me, or when that is your sensitivity as a man. It's your ability to tune into the emotions of what's going on around you. And that is our strength, but it's also our biggest vulnerability, because when we're young and we have this sensitivity, we all get hurt. Every single man gets hurt by the chaos of the world around him, by the people, by the way his caregivers show up, by being teased and mocked on the playground, whatever it is. Every single boy gets wounded to some extent, some more than others. And then walls are built, and then that sensitivity becomes something that we block off. And now it doesn't feel safe to speak up for what we want, because it feels like those emotions, the responses to us speaking up, are going to damage us in some way, because
Yeah.
we've trained ourselves to believe that by the experiences that we had when we were younger.
Well, and it also doesn't help that we have a lot of societal programming that says men are supposed to show up this specific way, and they're supposed to push their emotions down. They're supposed to not admit what they're feeling. They're not supposed to be vulnerable or any of that other stuff. And at the same time, it's like, well, we need a place to do that. It might not be with your partner, or at least not all of it. It might be like, well, I got to get together with my men's group, and I need to share like the rawness of what I'm going through, so that afterwards I can go back to her and I can share what is really going on without all that rawness and craziness that's going on. Because in the men's group, I can let that go. I can let down that guard, and I can let out both the inner masculine and the inner feminine, because we all have some masculine and feminine within us. And I can let all that out in a safe container where it can be held by those other men. And then I can come back and I can be like, here's what's really going on.
You were so dead on there, and I want to put a little point of emphasis on this, with how dead on you are with that and how right you are there. Because we, as men, if we bring our unprocessed emotions to our woman, she's opposite from us. And this is one of the reasons that dominant submissive dynamics work so well, is because men and women are functional and complementary opposites. We are built to function perfectly together by being exactly different from each other. We need each other. And it's exemplified in the physical anatomy, right? Stick, hole. We're we have a stick and we have a hole. We have two complementary opposites that wouldn't work the same if they were the same. Everything about us is that way. And so if we go to her with all of our unprocessed emotions, now she has to receive all of that. Well, we are the ones with the sensitive hearts. And she's actually not built to be receiving emotion. She's built to be expressing emotion. She's built to be the giver of emotion. She's built to be the embodiment of the heart of God, eros, aliveness. And that all comes through emotional expression. And she cannot be in her true feminine expression if we are dumping our emotions into her. She needs us to do exactly as you're saying and get our shit together. It doesn't mean that we don't tell her what's going on with us. It means we bring it to her with clarity. And then it goes from being an emotional expression to being an expression of truth. Like, here's what's been going on with me, rather than I'm feeling this and this is so painful. And like, we do that with other guys. We do that with our therapist. We do that in our journal. We do that in meditation. We do that anywhere but inside of our romantic relationship.
Yeah, there's a real truth to that, and it's interesting because as I've taken your course, there's one aspect of it I really appreciate, which is the journaling prompts. You have sentence stems that you use, and so I was working on, I think I'm on step 7 now, which is I dance with chaos. So that, and again, the synchronicity behind that, I'll tell you about it later after we're done recording, was kind of interesting. But with step 6, it was kind of looking at those wounds, and I'm like, well, how do I really handle and express these things? Like, how am I sharing that and shaping that? And I really sat with that for a while, and I'm like, this is why I do the men's work, because as I've found that the more I am able to share within a specific context, it does bring a level of clarity because I'm no longer allowing it to cloud my mind and my heart. Instead, I'm able to show up with a mirror finish, and I'm able to mirror to whoever is in my life. Here's what's going on with me, and I can hold the container in order to be fully present with your response and with what is happening with you. And allowing that release is so powerful, but it can't happen if we're if two people are going back and forth and there's no real sense of presence or a container. If it's leaky and the energy spilling everywhere, it's just going to get messy.
Yeah, and when we are able to hold ourselves together, then we are able to hold her. And we can really only hold her to the extent that we can hold ourselves. Like, we are that word container. Some guys are going to know what you mean by that. And to some people, that's going to go right over their heads. I used to kind of laugh at that word before I really understood the value or meaning of it. I was like, it sounded silly to me. But I think like the practical meaning of that is that I if I don't have my shit together, she can't lean on me because I can't even hold myself. How the hell is she going to submit to me and follow me if I won't even follow my own structure? How is she going to submit to me and follow me if I don't even follow myself? So being able to contain myself, to control myself, to hold myself together, and to get my shit in line gives me the strength to then be able to lead her, for her to be able to let go and trust that I've got her, because I can't have her if I don't have myself. The way I
Yeah.
say this is she can't surrender into a void.
Mhm.
So any part of me that's empty is not available to a woman for her to lean on, for her to surrender to, for her to submit to. And this works in the bedroom and outside the bedroom, by the way. This is life wide.
Well, and I think that goes back to the sensitive heart. When we deny our own sensitivity as men, it's not just about the sensitivity of the emotions. We're denying the sensitivity to the environment around us, the awareness. I mean, men have this primal presence, this the hunter. It's interesting. This last weekend I was at an event, and the guy that was leading the particular team I was on, he said, you know, he said, what is the quiet like if you go out into the wild, how do you know like when you're in an area where you're unsafe? He said, is when all the animals are quiet because there's a predator there and predators are quiet. And so he's like, the reason you make noise if you go out into the wild is because when you do that, the animals know that you're not a predator. You're letting them know that you're in the environment and that you're there. And so they start coming around again because they know. So he's like, it's really important to get rid of the predator energy in order to establish the container, in order to establish that presence. Well, I think the predator energy is I'm out of touch with the environment around me. I'm out of touch. I'm in that covert place where I'm trying to get something from someone without being transparent and honest and clear. And it's because I've actually tuned out the environment around me. I'm just so focused on that one thing I want that I'm not paying attention to everything else and all the information that's coming in that I need to receive in order to show up effectively.
And that word information is so key. This is the absolute entry point into being able to lead a woman, is recognizing that how she feels is information. It's not personal. It's not about you. It's the experience that she is having, and it's real to her. Even if it seems illogical to you, it's real to her. And so when you can look at her and how she feels in the moment as an information, as a piece of information for you, then you can actually lead her forward because you're connecting to reality. The truth of what most men do when it comes to the emotions of their woman is they make it all about themselves. We get defensive, or we try to explain ourselves or rationalize, or there's the deer analogy that you might have, or acronym you might have heard before: defensive, explaining yourself, I forget the other E, and rationalizing. All of these different little means of really trying to make her emotions about ourselves. And it shows her and us that we perceive her as a threat. If we're defending ourselves and reacting to how she's feeling, we're perceiving her emotions as a threat. Well, how can we ever connect to what she's actually going through if we're perceiving it as a threat? So then we become rather than the predator, rather than that hunter, then we become the defensive animal, right? That animal that's backed into a corner, going back to the analogy of the wild. Now we become that animal who's backed into a corner. And this is why guys lash out. This is why guys that are wounded are really, they try to show up as dominant, like they get all aggressive. That's not dominant, that's defensive. It's being backed into a corner and lashing out to protect your inner sensitivity because of your wounding. So like I said, the entry point to this is really being able to see how she feels as a data point, accept it as real, and then learn from it. Don't make it about yourself. Like, have your own experience, have your own needs. But this codependent thing that we do, where we get tied up, where her feelings now are like she's making me feel a certain way. She can't make you feel anything. You're deciding how you feel. Your reactions belong to you.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely the truth. And that's where that kind of comes into taking responsibility for ourselves. Like as, you know, that's part of this essential aspect of work. Am I taking responsibility for my emotions? And there's a very real difference between acknowledging someone from a place of guilt and shame. Like, oh, I did this and I'm feeling guilty and shame because you're still caught up in reaction, as opposed to I'm taking responsibility from this place from a grounded, present awareness. I've had my guilt and shame. I processed that, and I can fully take this on without reacting to to you because I actually fully own it. here's what happened, and this is what I did, etc. I share that as an example because I think it's a good example of where men get so reactive, and a lot of times it's because they have their unprocessed wounding, their issues, and they're letting those control drive the steering wheel, and so they're going along like this, and it's just like, okay, we're going to go suddenly like this, or we're going to go like this. Whoops, there goes the car's going off the rails there. And like, how can anybody trust you at that point? Because you're reacting, and a lot of times you're reacting to stuff that has nothing to do with the person in and of themselves. They're sharing something with you, and it happens to be touching that trigger point, that inner wound, and your inner sensitivity is like, I've got to protect that, instead of,
Yep,
oh, here's
exactly.
something I need to take a look at and sit with for a while and figure out. And I don't need to do it with you. I need to acknowledge it with you. I need to go and I need to journal. I need to meditate. I need to talk with some other men who can appreciate and understand what I've gone through, or talk to my therapist or my coach. And then I can come back, and I can come back and I can share it from a place where I'm fully taking responsibility, as opposed to just lashing out from guilt and shame and all those other emotions, which are all valid to feel. Don't get me wrong, they're all valid to feel. But when we're letting them control the show, we've essentially lost control of ourselves, and we've lost awareness. And so we're not fully showing up. And the container at that point just cracks open, and the milk spilled all over the floor.
So I want to share something with you here that has really been a driving motivation for me.
Mhm.
When I started to see how deeply, deeply triggered I got so often, how defensive I got was my number one go-to. Like I was captain defense, and then I was also captain over explainer.
I've
And
been those.
yeah, so when I started to see what was underneath that, like why would I act that way? Why would I be getting so defensive? And started working through this to a point where I kind of got my hands around a couple pieces of this, and now all of a sudden I was able to react differently. I was able to respond differently, and how much better that felt. I decided for myself that I wanted to see how close to untriggerable I could become. I want to see if I can get to a place where no external circumstances have control over my internal state. Now, that's a tall order. I'm not there yet, but I will say that the first 80 to 90% towards untriggerable is actually relatively easy. Once you start seeing these things, and you desire to move beyond, I guess, being so easily upset, so easily put on the defense, when you want to get past it and you're committed to getting past it, then you actually start to welcome the things in your life that trigger you. Because what I realized is I can't work through this crap. I can't make myself stronger. I can't get my shit together unless I see where I don't have my shit together. And that's why we start to value those things that piss us off. Because now when I have like that quick twitch reaction to something, like, oh, there's one. That feeling I just had wasn't about that thing that just happened there. Somebody cut me off in traffic and I got like angry, like real angry, real fast. Like that had nothing to do with that guy. That was all in here. That came from in here. So then the process of starting to work through those things is first they have to happen and we realize it after it happened. Then once these things happen a few times, you start to see them as they happen. And then eventually you can start to see them before they happen. And that's where it starts to get really powerful because when you notice that it's coming, even if you don't catch it and you still fall into it, but you see it before it gets there, like the guy cuts you off, you're like, oh, like, but when you notice that it's coming and you still lose your shit, but now you're on the front side of it. Like now you're ahead of it instead of it controlling you. Now you've got it by the tail. Because once you can see it before it happens, now you can start to make different choices. And that's how we get beyond triggers. We don't get beyond triggers by like singing Kumbaya in a circle and being all mushy. We get there by getting pissed off and then wanting a different experience and working through that until it gets better.
Yeah, and we get through it by also sharpening ourselves with the context of other people calling us out, whether that is your partner, although ideally she's not always having to do that, but also like other men, like you know, iron sharpens iron, right? So if I'm going and I am, you know, coming to men and I'm sharing, here's something that's going on with me, you know, having them be able to say, well, hey, here's where I'm noticing that you're out of integrity. Here's where you there's some accountability that's needed here. And I'm willing to hold you accountable. I mean, that's an important part too. I'm willing to hold you accountable so that you can get that done and you have someone to report to about it. But you've still got to do it. You have to get back into integrity. A good example I'll share is that you know, at this weekend that I was recently at, I made a decision that I was going to take responsibility for some stuff in my previous relationship that I had previously taken responsibility of it from a place of guilt and shame. So it was reactive. And so I was like, no, I'm going to do this from a different place. I've processed this stuff. I'm going to take responsibility from a place of just presence and awareness. And I'm going to own that this is where I messed up. And so I shared that with the group I was with, and they said, "Do you want to be held accountable?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do." So the agreement was that by Friday of this week, I would call my ex up after texting her to make sure she was ready for it. I'd call her up and share what I needed to share, and then you know go from there. And it was such a powerful experience because by choosing to do it that way, and I've already gotten it done. You know, I texted and I
You
called
knew I
and I
was going to
shared.
ask you, didn't you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I did it. I did it right after I left the event. I texted her and I'm like, hey, would you be available for a call? Yes, you can call. And then when we talked, I said, you know, I'd like to share some stuff with you without rehashing our relationship, where I take some responsibility. Are you open to that? Yes, I am. Okay. And I shared the things I needed to share and you know, after that call was done, I felt like I had let go of stuff that I'd been holding on to that was keeping me having imaginary conversations up here and wasn't helping me, certainly wasn't helping her. But then afterwards, being able to text done to those people and being like, yeah, I did it. I did what I needed to do to get clear and get back into integrity so that I can move forward. And I healed a part of myself. And I know I'm not going to do that ever again because I've learned from this. But having that accountability piece with other people is absolutely essential for this work. Because if we're not accountable to ourselves or to other people when we need to be, we're not going to do it. And I've seen that happen so often with men, and I've been that man sometimes as well. And at a certain point, it's kind of like I get sick of my own bullshit. So, like, why do I want to continue replicating this bullshit? Let's just fucking own it. Let's take
Yeah.
responsibility.
The way I look at external accountability is it really has to be a training ground for self accountability because at a certain point, I want to be able to just do the things that I say that I'm going to do and not need somebody else to be checking up on me. And that's something that I've come so far on because I was, again, like this showed up better in my lack of physical fitness in the past than anywhere else because I would start and stop in 12 months out of a year. I would probably start and stop 8 different workout programs in a year. And I did this for years. Like this was going to be the one. This is going to be the time. I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to be in great shape in 6 weeks. I'm going to, whatever. And eventually I had to stop looking outside of myself for the accountability and just sit down with myself and say, you just need to get your shit together and go show up. Now, I did use some external accountability in the form for me of joining a CrossFit gym and going to which I joined CrossFit at almost 300 pounds and severely out of shape in 2015. And I just about died. But committing to the people that were there that I was going to show up for this same class 3 times a week and work as hard as I could, that was the external accountability that I started with. But then eventually it was like, I have to be able to make myself do these things. I can't just count on other people expecting me to be there. So external accountability is helpful, but it has to be a training ground for internal or self accountability, because that's how we really get to a place of being solid where we don't need somebody else to be like, hey, did you do it yet?
Exactly. No, no, that is absolutely true. And I would say that in general, what I've found with that is the more you get better at being accountable with other people, the less you actually need it, because
Mm.
you start realizing that more and more and more, and it kind of goes full circle back to, like, as I said, when I signed up for your class, you're like, what are your reasons for doing this? Are you doing this for the right reason? Because if you're doing this for the wrong reason, this class is not going to get you what you want. You have to do it for you. It can't be for somebody else. It has to be for you. You have to be internally motivated. And it actually goes back to something that I've discovered more and more, which is the more you tap into that intrinsic motivation and that drive, the better you are able to lead in your own life. And as a result, you're able to lead in all the other areas of your life with all the other people that are in your life. And you can't lead without learning how to connect in with yourself. Otherwise, you are always going to be at the whims of other people.
I remember a question that someone asked me years ago, and it gnawed at me for years until I really got to the bottom of it for myself. But the question was, you know what you need to do. Why don't you just do it?
Mm,
And when you think about that, why don't we just do the things that we know we need to do? Why is it so hard? Well, that's because of that programming. It's because of that conditioning. It's because of all of this emotional baggage that we carry. And the fact is, there's some part of us that actually wants to not do the thing. We're getting something out of staying the same. And changing would challenge those internal beliefs. And those internal beliefs don't like to be challenged.
no, they don't. Yeah, they definitely don't. But you're exactly right. I mean, why don't you just do what you need to do? Like, you know what you need to do. What's keeping you back? And
The
whatever the
answer to
reasons
that
are.
question will point you inside yourself every single time.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, whatever it is, it's inward. It's not outward. You can give yourself all kinds of excuses. And that's the funny thing. Like, that's what I found. Like, I come up with all kinds of excuses for why I'm not doing it, because he said so, or she said so, or because of X, Y, and Z. Okay. And how long are you going to let that control your life? Because that's exactly what happens. A person has no control over their life when they are letting external influences decide why they are going to do what they're going to do. But once you flip that switch and you're like, I'm going inward and I'm going to do that work and I'm going to do what I need to do and I'm going to move forward, it changes your life. I actually got into men's work it was a little over 2 years ago. And it's funny now because I look back at, like, who I was 2 years ago, and that guy, I wouldn't even recognize that guy and he wouldn't even recognize me because of how much I've changed. And a huge part of that was I'm sick and tired of showing up a certain way. And I'm the one causing this. I can blame it on all the other people. I can say, oh, she was horrible to me and everything else, but that's just me playing the victim. It's not doing me any good. And there's an interesting book that I read, Existential Kink. Are you familiar with it?
Yep, very much.
I actually put it on your recommendation list because I've actually put a few books on the reading list there. Like you said, like, well, you said I've actually done that a few times because I've been like, hey, there's some stuff. I read through that book and I applied it, and it was fascinating to discover. Here's why I like to be a victim, because this is actually getting me off in some way. It is empowering me, but it's not empowering me in a way that actually helps me. It's just making me feel a certain way so I can feel justified. And when you take a look at that, it's like, oh, but do I really want to do that anymore? Because how is it helping me? It's not.
There's this phrase that I heard years ago that it things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. And when I look at my life through that lens and I see like, okay, something didn't go my way. It seems like it didn't go my way. The reality is it went the way that it went. So I can either bitch about it or I can look at what is it in this that is here to somehow benefit my evolution? What is it that's here to somehow help me grow or to learn a lesson? If I keep repeating the same mistakes, that is happening for me. If I keep going through the same patterns, that's happening for me. It's trying to, like, it's my life reflecting back to me something that I have refused to see. And once I can see it, then that pattern can stop repeating itself.
Yeah. And that's when we take ownership of that pattern and we change it. And we're no longer living from a place of reaction because a lot of times those patterns are based on those old wounds. And so we're reacting to people and events and things. And hey, I mean, like when you're a kid, you take on certain survival strategies because that's what's available to you, and you're doing the best you can to survive a situation where you don't have a lot of power. Here's big tall human who can do all kinds of things to you, and if you don't do what big tall human says, you could end up getting hit or whatever else. And so it's like, yeah, I'm going to do what I have to do. But then we carry that forward into our lives and we start replicating that in our adult relationships and other circumstances and events. And that's when we begin to discover it doesn't work for us. And a lot of times people get trapped in it though. They're like, well, I don't know what to do. And
We
that's where doing like parts work, like through IFS or doing existential kink work or like talking to a therapist or doing some of these other things can be so helpful because it unpacks that stuff. And then as a person, whether you're a man or a woman, you can start to release those reactions, those old patterns, and start to discover, well, who do I really want to be? Because until you do that, you're actually somebody else's person. You're a person who's responding to what somebody did to you. So you're not even your own person at that point.
well, most of us build most of our lives around the desire to maintain attachment. Gabor Mate talks about this concept you're talking about here as um, attachment versus authenticity. Like we're all faced with those moments in our childhood where we have to decide, am I going to do what I want to do or what big tall human says that I have to do? And we learn, don't do what you want, don't listen to yourself, don't honor yourself, ignore that and do what someone else wants, do what someone else tells you to do. And so then we build a pattern of that, not only of trying to do what everybody else wants, but also the pattern of not listening to ourselves, not listening to our own true desires. And bringing this back around to the idea of dominance, there's nothing less dominant than complete self abandonment. You can't lead anyone anywhere. You can't be in charge or in control of any kind of a situation if you are not honoring your own authentic desire. And so many men, one of the biggest gripes I hear from women, I've coached hundreds of submissive women and couples at this point, and one of the biggest gripes that I hear from women is that the men in their lives who want to be dominant are either A, just triggered and reactive, or B, they try to figure out what she wants and give it to her. Like, what are your kinks? What are your turn ons? What are you into? And then I'm just going to do that. And that is trying to maintain attachment. That's that childhood pattern of trying to keep that person in your life, or it's a fear of losing them, or it's a need to be validated by their approval of you, rather than standing up for what it is that you want, who you are, and where you want to take someone. What do I want to lead you into? What do I want to show you?
It's performative. It's
Mhm.
it's it's performative as opposed to being real. I will perform this thing for you so that you won't leave me. You won't
Mhm.
abandon me. But it doesn't the sad thing is that ultimately it leads to exactly the outcome you're trying to avoid. And how many times do we have people that leave our lives because I was trying so hard to, I pedestaled them. I was trying so hard to win their approval and get them to like me. And those people end up losing respect for you because you have essentially abandoned yourself in trying to keep, and then they abandon you, and then you're left with where you're at. Oh, I'm a victim. This person did X, Y, and Z. Well, and what did you do? And what are you going to do about it? What are you going to start doing to tap into your inner sovereignty, your inner king, and manifest that in a way that is respectful and with dignity, and at the same time is real and relational and raw? It's who you are. Show up instead of just and actually care about like what you want and need and long for and be able to speak for that instead of allowing somebody else to dictate that for you because they're not going to stay for that anyway because they know it's not going to be real. It's not authentic. How can it be?
Right. And this is where I think what I see happening a lot of times is when guys will hear that and they'll say, "Oh, well, now I'm just going to go do what I want. I'm going to dom that bitch, right? I'm going to take what I want from her because I'm supposed to do it my way." It's like, well, no, you get to do both. You have to stand in your own desire. You have to stand in your own authenticity. You also get to hear her. You receive her. You pay attention to her needs and her desires. And then you lead her into experiences that the two of you can have together that are mutually satisfying and beneficial. So there's 99% of the time you can find win-wins where you're doing what you want to do, but it's also something she really enjoys. And you just get to craft that experience so that she can follow you in it and let go and not have to be the one being the decider. But this is what we do when we put her, all of her wants and all of her needs and everything first, and we put ourselves at the bottom of the list. We're actually just putting her in control. We're making her the dominant because she's just getting everything she wants.
And a lot of times that may actually not be what she wants. That's the
Usually not.
yeah. One thing I want to touch on before we wrap up here is you talk about I watch your podcast every week, both the episodes with you and Don and the episodes with you and Eric. But one of the things you talk about is loving dominance. And I think a lot of times when people think of DS relationships, they don't think that love can enter into the picture. So can you speak to that for a few moments and like what that actually looks like? Because I see in the episodes with you and Don that clearly there is a lot of love between the two of you.
And we started our first 10 years together, including 8 years of marriage, in a very unconscious, very vanilla, very loving relationship, but also very depolarized and kind of the standard relationship, the unfortunate standard relationship arc where hot and heavy at the beginning, lots of lust, lots of infatuation, and then the old patterns kick in and all of that kind of dies down and it just became very friendly. And so then we became dominant submissive when I finally spoke up for what I wanted after a decade together and said, I want you to be my submissive. And she said, huh? What does that mean? Her only experience or knowledge, even knowledge of it, was from having read 50 Shades of Grey. And, you know, take it or leave it, I will always appreciate that book because it was the only thing I had to lean on to start to show her what it was that I was wanting to do here. Like, yeah, kind of like that, but bigger, different, more focused on life and less on just on kink. And I heard somebody say on another podcast that love has no place in dominant submissive relationships because love corrupts authority. Love takes away from authority.
Mm.
And I couldn't think of a more exactly wrong statement than that. Because how can you take authority over another person's life if you don't have some kind of love in your heart for them? Like, love is the balancing power to authority. Love is what makes authority possible. So when I I deeply love, respect, and care for my wife, I also tell her what to do all the time. And she follows my lead. But do you know what else she does? She reflects back to me what it feels like to follow my lead. And that's the check on my authority because I care about her. I love her. So if my leadership is not feeling good to her, if it's hurting her, I'm going to adjust my tack or I'm going to figure out what it is that's not working here. But it's the love that I have for her and her love for me and that communication that we keep open between us that allows the authority side of this relationship to function well. And that's, I think, the most important thing that I can impart to anyone who's thinking about maybe reconsidering their like their view of these kind of dominant submissive power exchange dynamics is that there are two relationships happening at once. There's the authority relationship where the dominant is the leader and the submissive is the follower. And then there's the emotional relationship that's happening simultaneously. And that is her reflecting back her feelings, her experience, what she's receiving from you. And then for me, on the dominant side, I am the receiver on this. So she's receiving my authority. I'm receiving her emotions. This is why I said earlier, like we're the ones with the receptive heart. I can't be vomiting my emotions on her and have the authority based relationship work. I have to receive how she feels. That's kind of the balancing factor on the scales to make authority work. So we can have these intense power exchange dynamics and also have love, and they feed each other.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of accuracy to that. And even if you explore a different type of relationship dynamic at the heart, you have to have love. There has to be love there. So no matter what, that is an essential component. But I like how you put that in relationship to DS dynamics because I think that what I've observed is sometimes that it's lacking because there's this perception, well, you can't have love with this. And I disagree with that. I think it's possible, but I think it takes a lot of work to do it.
Oh, it does, because you have to break down all of those old patterns that go all the way back. We get people who come to us all the time who are in these maybe very loving relationships, but they want to start to incorporate power exchange dynamics into them. And every single time, it's the it works fine in the bedroom generally, but then outside of the bedroom, it doesn't work the same because love clashes with these power exchange dynamics when we haven't healed ourselves. We have to heal ourselves so that love can work together with them. Otherwise, we're clashing all of our old beliefs about love and our desire for the intensity and passion of these kind of relationships just run face first into each other. And that's where we come in, and that's what I think we do really well is teach people how to sort that stuff out.
So you have your website is infinitedevotion.com, I believe. I hope I got
Yes,
that
sir.
right. It is going to be in the show notes. So for anyone who is watching this, you can go and visit the website. And you have three courses that you offer right now. Can you speak to those briefly?
Yeah, so our three main self-study courses, the one you've mentioned a few times, Becoming a Dominant Man. This is a 12-step program that I developed for men to do this inner work, to bring you into a more dominant inner expression. And it walks you through a process that you can follow. It's the one that you've been going through yourself. We have a second one called Submissive Foundations, and that teaches the submissive partner how to approach submission from a place of self-respect, how to be submissive but not be in a people pleasing, not be in self-abandonment, how to use your voice and to transcend your fears without throwing yourself on the sword. And then the brand new one we just released is called Structuring Your DS Dynamic. And it's where we teach people how to build kind of the structure and foundation of a dominant submissive dynamic to do things like the rules and the rituals and writing a contract that are some of the fundamental parts of how we overtly negotiate what is happening inside of these kinds of relationships. And so in that course, I walk people through the same process that I use to set these things up in our relationship.
Excellent. And then you also offer coaching services as well. Is that correct?
Yep. So we do some one-on-one coaching, and we have some group coaching programs that we run throughout the year for couples and for women. And I host 2 podcasts. So yeah, I got a lot going on.
You do have a lot going on. Like I said, I've been following your work for a while now, and I've definitely benefited just from watching the podcasts alone, which people can find on YouTube. Highly recommend, and just because you'll get a lot out of it, but also taking your course has been, as I shared, life-changing for me. That's my testimonial for you because I have found it to be really it's just really helped me take a good hard look at different components, and it's fit really well into all the other work that I've been doing. So it's like, oh, okay, here's what I want to do in order to take more responsibility, more self-care, things like that. And I mean, I would say really to any man out there that you could take that course regardless of whether you wanted that relationship dynamic or not, and you would still come out ahead as a result. So I mean, that's how strongly I feel about that particular class. Like it's a really good course.
That's
All
a great
right.
testimonial. Can I clip that out and use it on?
You're more than welcome to, my brother. You're more
All
than
right.
welcome to.
I appreciate
I'd
that.
be, yeah, please do, because yeah, you're doing good work, and we need more work like that. All right. Well, Andrew, I just want to thank you so much for making time for me today. I hope to have you on again in the future at some point down the line. And for those of you who are watching this is our first episode, but there will be more where I'm interviewing other people, as well as, of course, the regular episodes that I do where it's just me monologuing.